Thank you. What I'm going to talk about are very personal views, and one thing which I have learned is it's very difficult to predict anything with any confidence. So please treat what I say with a pinch of salt. A politician once said, "When I came to power, we were standing on the edge of a precipice. Now we have taken a great step forward." I'm not sure if that's what he means to say, but very often confidence in the banking system is very much like in a cartoon. The character runs off the edge and is going perfectly fine until they look down, and then they fall fast. And confidence in the banking system is very much like going over a precipice. When it goes, everything fails and crashes quickly. Right now, I feel we are in the eye of the storm. We have had low interest rates while we deal with deficits and debts, but we have not made enough progress in all countries. And as interest rates rise, the cost of funding government and consumer mortgages and debt will rise quickly. This will have severe knock-on effects, and reductions in the value of government debt will begin a vicious circle with impacting bank capital and possibly property. In other words, it's still all very fragile. But there are other issues and difficulties besides the financial crisis. The internet has opened the world up to everybody for the first time. Everybody around the world can see better than they have ever seen before how all of us live, and the glaring inequalities will be addressed. There will be a gradual leveling of living standards with consequences on the developed world, and particularly when one looks at the emergence of the so-called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, you can see already this leveling process begin. The costs of the welfare state that have been put in place in many of the developed countries will continue to spiral out of control. And this is going to be exacerbated by growing life expectancy and the demographic curve. It was never intended for the next working population to have and to be able to finance such a burden. In the UK, if the retirement age today was put in line with the life expectancy that was in place when benefits were put in place and pensions were put in place, today people would have to retire at age 82 to have the same equivalency of the funding we have put in place. We need new work paradigms. Retirement needs to be rethought. Second careers must become the norm. Companies and careers are very geared and work well to climbing up. We need to find ways for people to climb gracefully down. We need demotion as well as promotion without it meaning you have to leave. I lived for many years in the US, and in the American War of Independence, soon to be continued by the Scottish War of Independence. I am Scottish. The cry was no taxation without representation. And I think that this is going to sum up how our children will feel about funding us. As the current generation retires, there is not going to be enough people to pay taxes to keep us in pension and medical costs. Life expectancy over the last 100 years has gone from 48 to 80. We are living beyond our means, none more so than the baby boomer generation, of which I am one. The proportion of contributors to the tax coffers as opposed to the users of tax revenues is moving lower and lower. The older generation, however, is gaining a majority of electoral power. The older generation is a percentage of those voting, very often will be the deciding vote. And their self-interest is going to be the maintenance of their pensions and their medical benefits. And so increasingly, those who are in work and paying for them will feel unrepresented. Who is going to pay? Meanwhile, they have to pay for themselves. There will be an increasingly stark divergence of voter interests, and social unrest, I feel, is a real possibility. My daughter is a doctor, and I know that she spends nearly all of her time dealing with the aged. Medical facilities are becoming old age care centers. The role of family and state in supporting the older generation needs to be revisited. Difficult choices need to be faced on the extent of medical care used to delay natural deterioration. It's very difficult to see how we can catalyze the debate. But in the worst case, necessity will be the mother of invention. So what can be done? I think it's a great problem that bankers and politicians have never been held in such low esteem. When I grew up, I remember the day my father took me to see my bank manager for the first time and introduced me and to have a talk with the bank manager about opening an account, how to write out a check, how to balance monthly my balance. This was in Scotland. I was told, never a lender or a borrower be. And the bank manager was a pillar of the community. Someone everybody trusted. They may not have liked him, but they trusted. We need to rebuild that trust. I always feel the test is, are you proud at a cocktail party? When someone says, what do you mumble or do you say proudly, I'm a banker? I suggest recently a lot of people may have found another way of answering that question. We need a sense of the spirit and not the letter of the law. We need a sense of duty to the communities we serve. There's a basic lack of trust in finance, a sense that people have been playing roulette with people's lives with inappropriate rewards and a lack of accountability. We need a sense of proportionality or fairness between reward, effort, and talent. Because banks and politicians are going to be two of the most essential ingredients in solving our issues. I think the problems with prop trading, new forms of leverage, shadow banking, getting caught up with mathematical models, and of course, one of the things we have learned is that black swans do exist. This curious mathematical certainty that we felt in models, which meant why not double up and double up again, has been proven to be wrong. There is no reward without risk. If it looks too good to be true, it is too good to be true. I do feel that we must separate traditional consumer, corporate lending and trade finance from the use of proprietary capital. I think there are arguments in favor of what the US used to call Glass-Steagall that I didn't see before. Some parts of banking must not be allowed to fail. Other parts of banking need to fail often. There needs to be moral hazard. There needs to be reversions to more prudent property lending regimes. People need to know who they're lending to, not just go by statistics. We need open global trade and dynamic, robust, and confident banking systems as two essential ingredients to gain the growth we need. We need all the multipliers and catalysts we can to operate on world trade. And we must have a healthy equity market to help capital formation for businesses. We need a greater respect for democracy and a more educated electorate. We have to try and move away from empty and facile promises of new expenditure. We need politicians with gravitas, moral fiber, and respect to stand up and explain these difficult issues. We need more bipartisanship. Of course, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And it's the worst because the electoral cycle makes it such a short period of time for long-term decisions. There is a move towards wanting smaller sovereign communities. People want a more direct say on their local lives. But leveraging the large regions and the world is very important. Respect for the EU is also low. And there is a very limited democratic mandate for the European Union. The euro is a half-completed project. Everyone knows it cannot sustain without a fiscal and budgetary dimension and a proper central bank. But the euro splits the EU between those in the euro and those not in the euro. And one size cannot fit all. But it's very important that it's not allowed to go back from an open trade area. A single, seamless market is a hugely valuable prize. You can't write enough rules to enforce behavior or to envisage all future behavior. You need some sense of social responsibility, some sense of a moral compass. And the key has to be in education at the school level, the government level, the corporate level, and the parental level. There needs to be a serious partnership of the four stakeholders of shareholders, employees, customers, and the communities in which they operate. It must be constructive partnership, not confrontational separate constituencies. You cannot have companies that merely focus on shareholder value. You cannot have regulators who see all the world as people to be confronted. We cannot see people operating in communities without regard for communities. We must understand the long-term interests of employees. Communication is key, and in today's world, we have too much data and not enough knowledge and not enough insight. A lot of our social skills are being blanked out in the electronic age. Emails are staccato forms of communication. They are very blunt. You lose tone, body language, descriptive vocabulary, visual signals, contact, emotion. But they're great tools as well, and huge effects on productivity. And it's opening up the world in amazing ways. It's very hard now for a ruler to hide from the governed, and we can see that all over the world. But we need to inculcate in everybody a sense of responsibility, that rewards need to be proportionate to value, and we need to make our children proud with an increased sense of social conscience in business and politics. No matter how smart you are, you don't know what you don't know. Even Einstein, there is not the slightest indication that nuclear energy will ever be obtainable, said Einstein. He did not know. My father worked for a record company called Decca, and on his first day in the job, like so many other people, he was introduced to the man who had turned down the Beatles. He was on record as saying, "The Beatles have no future. We don't like your sound. Groups are out," in 1962. I'm also reminded by the note a publisher sent to J.K. Rowling when she sent in the first draft of Harry Potter. "Children just aren't interested in witches and wizards anymore," said the publisher. People just don't know. And in business, Alexander Graham Bell once predicted in 1847, he said, "I can see a time when every town in the US will have a telephone." And it's not only in the past. In 2007, Steve Ballmer, CEO of Microsoft, said, there is no chance that the iPhone will get any significant market share. No chance at all. Spotting the future is difficult. We can't see the future because we are limited by our experience and current knowledge. We invent our own boundaries. I live currently near a place called Oxford, and there used to be a race called the Mile, which is nearly the 1,500 meters. And for 100 years after they measured the mile, there was a big barrier. Who could run the mile in less than 4 minutes? There were a lot of learned medical journals that said that the human heart could not run at 4 minutes. If you ran at 4 minutes, your heart valves would explode and separate from your heart, causing lesions that would kill you, said a lot of learned doctors. The 4 minutes was the limit of human endurance. It cannot be beaten. In 1954, Roger Bannister ran the first 4-minute mile. 12 months later, 100 people had run the 4-minute mile. By the next Olympics, every athlete competing seriously had run a 4-minute mile. We do not know our boundaries, and most of them are self-imposed. We do not know what is possible. Human ingenuity is unpredictable. I don't think the makers of this lorry envisaged such a creative use. And it's very wrong of us to ever underestimate the human spirit. I have great faith in the human spirit and great faith in the ingenuity. I don't know how we will stumble into the future. I just know we will. I don't know how we will solve these issues, but I know we will. And so I'd like to end with a quote from Thomas Edison, which I do strongly believe in, and that I will predict with full confidence. But if we could do all the things we were capable of, we would astound ourselves. Thank you very much.
Well, this was totally unprepared, by the way, and in a way of seeing the political, solid, well-expressed view, yet the realistic, morally driven, socially conscious, speaking of someone that has no thing in the game. I'm biased. I am embarrassed of what we have done to this world, and I am a banker. And I am upset, and I tell this to my kids, that no one has complained, and we have stolen their future. And many of us responsible for this crisis are still walking around with no change in the way we operate. It is an embarrassment for the world. And I'm thrilled to see someone talking about the human spirit and how can we, if we do our most, at least look back and say we did what we ought to do. And I really hope that as alumni of this school, we rebel. I've said this over and over and over again, but it is our responsibility. And we have a wonderful opportunity now to talk to him and try to do the best of this crisis, so that the fantastic speech of the Vice Primer Ministro said, we don't get out of them by pushing the problems to the future. So what a wonderful combination of a fantastic politician and a fantastic dose of wisdom from someone that puts his money at work. I'm sure there are many questions, but I'm just gonna throw one. If you were to assess where we are in the context of getting out of this crisis and mindful of the need to obviously say we're coming out, because hope is probably the most important fuel in any engine by far, but you can always clog it. But if you put it at the right dose, hope is critical. But are we putting too much hope and too much emphasis on the green grass, green shoots. And what is your assessment of where we are versus what we are being told?
I think that most of the issues that we face are very difficult to deal with until the crisis hits you in the face. And only then can you get a real discussion of the issues and a real mandate and discussion with the electorate. I don't know what is possible and who is to blame, but I do feel that politicians do not have meaningful and honest dialogues with the electorate unless they're in crisis. And I rather sense that this underestimates the electorate. So I think countries that have been undeniably in crisis, and I think it's very interesting to hear about Portugal and Greece. Of course, the most needed to be done there, and so a lot of hard choices have been made. In the UK, I don't see the same picture of hard choices being made. To use the American phrase, I think the can has been kicked down the road. In France, I don't see the hard choices having been made, for example. I think I was at a dinner last night and heard some comments that even someone from Germany was saying that they didn't feel that in Germany hard decisions had been faced up to or made. For some reason, we need the crises to have honest conversations. I wish it weren't the case, but it just seems to be the case. I do think that we are not on an ever upward path out of this. I think we will have a very rocky road, but we will find a way out.
Let me deepen on that. It was very clear as we went into this crisis that societies, Germans, I work with Germans, by the way, and for instance, Mediterraneans, have a totally different view of inflation. We feel comfortable with inflation, so we get big loans and mortgages. The Germans hate it. They pay everything cash. So that leads to totally different views to managing interest rates, I have to believe. And definitely the need for a common fiscal policy. Yet, they need to major decisions, like fiscal integration, that are at the heart of the questions of the euro, which I still have. And not having questions on the euro is fooling ourselves, because there's nothing wrong. There's a common dialogue, it doesn't matter. But, so what are the one thing, I love the pithiness of your wisdom, really. What is the one thing we have to get right so that we haven't kicked this crisis 20 years forward and it's going to hit us when we have young nietos around us? So what is the one thing, we've earned the time through the suffering to afford that thing, okay? So this is fantastic the way it's been handled. But one thing we have to get right in Europe so that Europe doesn't break 20 years from now. What is that one thing?
Well, I worry that the euro is a very divisive force in Europe. I think it cannot last as a long-term currency without there being, without the members of the euro and the users of the euro having some commonality, some cooperation on fiscal and expenditure underlying the currency, which means that there will be a club euro and a club non-euro, if you like, or the rest. And that means that the picture of sovereignty is that very much euro will drive down a federal route, and it will widen the rift between those who see Europe as a strong, open marketplace, as a trading bloc, from those who see it as something far more heading towards like a federal states of the United States, if you like. If you live in the UK, you are battered ceaselessly by people saying, why are we in Europe? Why don't we get out of Europe? And we are constantly shown that the results, if there was an open referendum, would be that it would be a vote probably to get out of Europe. And that is such a foolish mistake. But I think we need to have an understanding that not only Europe, but the more the world is an open trade area, the more we welcome the world, the less protectionist we become, the more global citizens we become, the more important it is, the better off we will be. And I think there's a funny conundrum, which on the one hand, people need to belong to something small, but they need to be able to operate in something big. And I think we confuse the two very often as having to be the same. And in the cause of confusing the two and of going for the big everything, people feel alienated and want to splinter the big into something small, if you see what I mean. You just have to look at how Yugoslavia splintered up, the Soviet Union splintered up, discussions in Spain, discussions in Belgium, discussions in the UK. There is this great desire to belong to something tangible and small. And I think that is something that needs to be taken into account, but we will not survive unless we become global citizens with open global trade. And we need to find a way to meet both those aspirations and not make one at the expense of the other.
There's a great question here. What, in your opinion, is missing in academia to integrate moral compass with the current discipline of neoclassical economics, mathematics, and business management, finance, do what you can, make money?
I think we pay lip service at the moment in the business schools, universities, in corporations. You have the obligatory ethics class. I'm willing to bet that most people who went to it did not find it the most interesting, did not find it the most exciting, did not find it the most relevant. A bit like when corporations get sent around an annual self-certification of having read your ethical standards and your codes of conduct and signed off your codes of conduct and what have you. We pay lip service to it. It is there like wallpaper. I think it's very hard to talk about it because it seems so soft, and soft issues are very hard to get to, but actually I think we need to have it right at the heart that there has to be some sense of a social context, some sense of social responsibility, some moral compass, as I call it, which can be very much down to the individual as to what that is. But I think without that context, you will find that almost every other thing ends up being hollow. The pursuit of promotion, the pursuit of money, the single delivery of shareholder value, or I think you find that unless you can place it in the context of overall advancing and value adding to the community, it all means nothing. And I think finding a way to make that come alive and finding a way to make this be a part of how we do business. I think that's important that boards, for example, are not set up to be acting in the interests of shareholders only. Boards must be set up to act in the interests and to coalesce the interests of employees, customers, shareholders, community, regulators. And I think sometimes we have been heading down a route of balkanizing or siloing interests, whereas we need to create interdependence. It sounds very soft and silly, and certainly if you had talked to me when I was in my prime and running up the ladder, it would not have been the first thing on my mind. But I do find that as I look around today and as I look at some of the things that take place in companies and in the financial world, I see a vacuum, an emptiness, a hollowness of no sense of community.
Well, I will emphasize that in Wall Street, where I've been 25 years, once we did an analysis, I think at the bank, I think it was 70% of the MDs were divorced or separated. Now, every MD, we pay them a lot of money so that they could pay Harvard and they could pay Columbia and IE, yet the most important thing you can do to educate your children is to love your wife. And I wonder, how are these people going to lead this bank anywhere when they don't even have common sense? Now, what is your moral compass? How do you apply it?
It's a lot easier to talk it than do it, I would say. Let me divert for 1 second. My son, who you know, has just a year ago finished going through business school. I hope you mustn't hiss or boo, but he went to INSEAD. It at least begins with an I. But I'm sure that the people at INSEAD are not nearly as unusual as you are. However, I find it interesting, like any good father, I started researching business schools and I started looking at league tables. And what I found interesting was that the main factor on league tables for business schools is the remuneration that the alumni earn when they leave the business school. That seems to be the main way in which we rank what is the best business school. Yeah. That can't be right, can it? Is that right? It struck me as being a rather simple view of life. Of course, all league tables are rather simple. But I know that a lot of people regard business school as I make an investment of taking this time out of my career and paying this much for my fees. What am I going to get back in return? I would plead to say what you should get back in return is not only a higher salary, but a higher consciousness.
Not only that, some people might think, oh, well, that's very easy to say when it's publicly known how much money you've made and how much money you have. And well, let me tell you one thing. If you know who you are and you stick firm to that, that is the best investment a person can do, to at least have a happy life. And I'm sure a life sufficient to have what you need and not be enslaved by what you want to own. Part of this crisis is that we fail to understand that having what we need is a fantastic moral compass. Trying to own everything we want is jumping into a precipice. And the worst thing of it is that we end up taking a lot of people behind us. I truly hope that as alumni of this school, we lead by example of that. If there's anything we can do, is close the gap between Main Street and Wall Street. And Wall Street is a reflection of what many of us are. It's Madrid Street, it's London Street, it's wherever street we are. And that we are mindful here of how much suffering is outside, so that through a moral compass that you have challenged us to implement in our lives, we can really make this school proud and get out of the crisis and not put the burden forward. I have to thank you. I don't know if Europe is a museum or a laboratory of ideas. Both things are fine, by the way, okay? Yet it has to be whatever we want it to be, not whatever someone has told us it has to be. And with that thought, we have to thank you. This was totally unexpected in a way, and for me, it has been very special. So I hope it has been for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.